Today, we kick off our summer sermon series on heroes, heroines, and heretics. And I'm reminded of a story that comedian Emo Phillips once told. He said, I was walking across a bridge one day, and I saw a man standing on the edge about to jump off. So I ran over and said, "Stop, don't do it." "Why should I?" he said. I said, "Well, there's so much to live for." He said, "Like what?" I said, "Well, are you religious or atheist?" He said, "Religious." I said, "Me too." "Are you Christian or Buddhist?" He said, "Christian." I said, "Me too." "Are you Catholic or Protestant?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too." "Are you Episcopalian or Baptist?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too." "Are you Baptist Church of God or Baptist Church of the Lord?" He said, "Baptist Church of God." And I said, "Wow, me too." "Are you Original Baptist Church of God? Or are you Reformed Baptist Church of God?" He said, "Reformed Baptist Church of God." And I said, "Me too." "Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation 1879? Or Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1915? He said, "Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1950. I said, "Die, heretic scum," and pushed him off the edge of it. Church folk, you got to watch out for them sometimes. Now, usually when you hear a minister talking about heretics from the pulpit, it's definitely not a good thing. But we're going to change all that a little bit up today. One of the greatest Catholic theologians of all times, arguably one of the most influential people in history, Thomas Aquinas, wrote that if forgers of money and other evildoers are straightaway condemned to death by the secular authorities, how much more reason is there for heretics, as soon as they are convicted of heresy, to be not only excommunicated, but put to death? He wrote this in the 13th century. Now, one of the big problems with such an ultimate penalty for heresy is that one generation's heretics often become the next generation's heroes and heroines. There's an issue about who gets to define who's a heretic and how quickly can we make such a determination. Now, as you heard with Emo Phillips' joke just a moment ago, the Christian churches have been dividing up for centuries over fine points of theology and practice. Each thinks that they're right, and by definition, the other is heretical. Now, if people who are of the same religion, the same country, the same denomination, sometimes even the same church, cannot even agree on what heresy is and what it's not, then the death penalty for heresy seems a bit extreme. And ultimately, we have to ask, who gets to choose? Keep in mind that heretics are considered heretics because they are proponents of some belief or some theory that's very different from the conventional beliefs and customs of our times. In fact, Jesus was a heretic among the majority of people in his time and his religion. Buddha was a heretic. Like Jesus, also speaking out against commonly held beliefs of his religion, commonly held beliefs of his culture. See, Jesus came from Judaism, Buddha came from Hinduism, and in Hinduism, they have a caste system, which breaks up the human family into 4 distinct castes, and then a 5th of people considered untouchable. And so the structure is that you're born into your caste, and you can't move from that caste in the course of your lifetime. So the Buddha, who was of the highest caste, Hindu, rejected this deeply ingrained tradition. In fact, that's why Buddhist monks shave their heads. Because Hindus of the religious caste shave their heads, but they leave a tuft or a lock of hair on the top in the back, have you ever seen a Hare Krishna in the airport or something like that? You see that they have that long, the shaved head, but then the long tuft of hair in the back. So in Hinduism, only people who were, at least certainly in his times, and it still continues to some degree in our times, but I'm really speaking of Hinduism, particularly in Buddha's times, people who were born into the religious caste were the only ones who could be religious leaders. But in Buddhism, the religious leaders cut off all of their hair as a rejection of the caste system and to open up the religious life and religious leadership to all people regardless of birth, and opening up the possibility of life's changing, being able to change your circumstances in life for all people regardless of heredity. Now, heresy is not just something that we find in religion. There's also social, political, and academic and other kinds of heresies. Martin Luther King Jr. and the early pioneers of African American civil rights were cultural heretics of their time. Martin Luther King is now renowned and honored, but he was despised by many in his own times. Today we universally decry his assassination, but many cheered when it actually happened. Why? In part because what he was advocating for went starkly against the established mores, beliefs, and customs of his times. The same could be said of those who advocated for a woman's right to vote. So when we look at the heroes and the heroines of history, they are often the heretics of their own times. Heroes and heroines are people who face danger and adversity, often coming from a position of weakness sometimes, and they demonstrate incredible courage in the face of whatever threat is before them. They often will move in ways that will be self-sacrificing for a greater good. But just because most heroes were originally heretics, that does not mean that all heretics are heroes. Stanford professor James March said it well when he said that he talked about the relationship between insanity, heresy, and genius. He said, "We sometimes find that heresies have been the foundation for bold and necessary change. But heresy is usually just new ideas that are foolish and dangerous and are appropriately rejected and ignored. So while it may be true," he says, "that great geniuses are usually heretics, heretics are rarely great geniuses." So think about some of the heretics and heresies of our own day. One of the biggest social political heresies now is held by those who deny global climate change. Among scientists and environmentalists and the majority of educated people worldwide, global warming is a real phenomenon that we are told is going to reap enormous death and destruction and devastation worldwide and relatively soon, especially if we don't do something about it. And we are told that it is more and more likely to eventually lead to the end of humanity itself if we don't do something about it. So the small minority of scientists and others who currently go against this idea are some of the most heretical people of our times. And since, according to conventional wisdom and scientific knowledge, this is a life and death proposition for humanity, this heresy, not unlike religious heresies, creates incredible passions and incredible division. When Thomas Aquinas, as I quoted earlier, spoke about immediate death needs to be the punishment for heresy, his point was that murder, if you think about it, is simply the ending of somebody's temporal or finite life. In his belief system, it's the life that doesn't really matter as much. But heresy leads people away from God according to his understanding, therefore away from salvation and eternal life. So in that sense, they're stealing somebody's eternal life, and therefore it's worse than murder. And so it should be punishable by death or something worse if there is something worse. Now, within his belief structure, that makes absolute and complete rational and logical sense. Now, if you believe that global climate change is going to destroy all of humanity and potentially take millions and millions of lives in the next few decades, if all of that we hear is true, then, it's worse than the taking of one life, because it's potentially the taking of all life. So, couldn't this idea of heresy lead to the conclusion that this is worse than murder itself? And, in other words, this is more than just an inconvenient truth. This is a catastrophe. So, what do you do about that? My point today is not to get into an environmental conversation. My point is to raise the awareness that it is a lot easier to know which heresies are absurd and criminal and immoral, and which heresies are heroic in hindsight. Today, Martin Luther King Jr. is the only non-president who has a statue on the Mall in Washington, D.C. His larger-than-life statue stands among Abraham Lincoln and George Washington's memorial and some of the most renowned American leaders of all times, making the point that one era's heretics are often another era's heroes and heroines. However, all heresies are not heroic. In fact, most heresies are just absurd. So part of our conundrum and part of the human condition is to figure out which heresies in our times point us towards truth and justice, and which parts of conventional wisdom need to be challenged. And at its best, All Souls is a church where we can ask the tough questions and leave no stone unturned as we strive for truth and understanding and justice and hope and love. We question religious beliefs, and we hold no dogma too sacred to examine. We ask questions of the social norms and are willing to challenge established ways of thinking and being. Now, this sometimes leads to us having opinions that go against the mainstream of our society, especially here in Oklahoma. And amen to that. All right. And that can cause others to brand us heretics. In fact, it was 6 or 7 years ago that somebody painted, one night, they painted on the garden door, right, the wooden garden door that's right out in the front of the church, they spray painted heresy. So we came in and we saw that. Now, the funny thing was, I think they wrote hearsay. But people who do this such thing are not always the brightest bulbs in the drawer. Hearsay. But now this summer sermon series will help us look at the heroes and the heretics and the heroines and heretics who have influenced our lives and our country and our culture and our religion. And we offer these as stories that we hope can teach us something about ourselves and our own times. We have one guest speaker who's coming here from the Philippines. She's an extraordinary woman who has a church in Manila, in the capital of the Philippines. And she's going to talk about one of her heretical heroes or heroines. But let's be clear, in a country that's over 90% Catholic, being a Unitarian leader and being a woman religious leader is pretty heretical in and of itself. She's going to be here, so don't miss that. Randy Lewis, who's on our staff, is planning to talk about Dorothea Dix, who is a woman in this country who did incredible things for the good of, changed our way of looking at mental illness in this country. And we also have an author and minister from Massachusetts coming here who just wrote a book on Woody Guthrie, who's going to be talking about that. And many other great speakers that are going to be here over the next 8 weeks as we lay out this series for you. So I hope you'll come, and if you're away, I hope you'll catch us on live stream. Both of our 10 and 11:30 services are on live stream, or you can catch the podcast on iTunes or YouTube afterward and sort of stay up on the whole series with us. But I want to conclude my message today telling you a little bit about what happened to me yesterday. Now, I rode on the church's float for Gay Pride, our Gay Pride float yesterday. Now, in Oklahoma, we just call it the Pride Parade because everybody is so afraid to use the word gay. Well, and especially, they definitely don't want to use the word lesbian. It's like a scary word. So I think it's funny because we have the Council Oak Men's Chorale here, gay men's chorus. Now, but it's called the Men's Chorale in Oklahoma because we're very genteel, very southern, I think, here, and so we don't like to say the gay men's chorus. We'll just say the men's chorale, and we have the Equality Center, not the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Equality Center. But it's interesting that it's interesting how but that's how we do it, and that's been strategic, I understand, and that's how it's worked, and we've done great work, and that's one of the greatest centers of its kind in the nation. So I feel really good about that. And in fact, it's not just called the Equality Center, it's called the Dennis R. Neal Equality Center, and Dennis R. Neal is a member of this church and has been for over 30 years, so I'm really proud of the name of that center, and Dennis. In fact, the Tulsa Oklahomans for Equality started here at All Souls. Some of you may know that, but before they had a building, before they really had an organization, they asked my predecessor, Dr. Wolf, if they could meet here, and he said absolutely, and so they met for years in a room here in the church as they built this organization, which has now become one of the premier organizations of its kind in the country, so I think we can all feel really good about that. Now, of course, I digress a little bit for you. If you haven't seen our float, I wanted to tell you about what happened yesterday. So if you haven't seen our float, I think it's out in the parking lot. It's a mini version of our church, and so we made it into a wedding chapel yesterday. We actually even had cans hanging from the back, bouncing on the road. And we had brides and grooms, I should say grooms and brides and brides. And then I was in my religious vestments, and we just we're up there enacting the idea of a gay marriage. In fact, two people, a couple who I see here right now, took a picture with me up there and announced their engagement, that they're planning to get married. So congratulations to you guys. With that in mind, and with the fact that Oklahoma is right on the cusp of opening itself up to marriage for same-gender loving couples, and that 19 states around the country already have, we thought that it would be wonderful to have our church float be a wedding chapel. And so I want to just tell you a little bit about what we find. Now, there were some signs that we saw along the parade route, and very interesting signs. There were a couple of blocks of religious protesters with Bible verses printed on large placards, and they had bullhorns, and they were shouting at us at a high volume about our iniquity and calling us to repent and forswear our evil ways, asking us to turn ourselves over to their version of Christianity so that we could have eternal life. They were so angry and so mean-spirited. They looked like bullies who would blow out the candles of your birthday cake before you could get to it. They were screaming so loud, and they were faces red and spitting and waving Bibles. And I thought, eternity with these people? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? That would be hell, not heaven. I thought to myself, is this who Jesus sent to try to convert people to the church? This is the best he could do? Because if that's true, then the church is in real trouble. Now, there were other signs, though, that read, Jesus loves you. And there was even a group of Christians holding signs that said things like, I'm sorry for the way we Christians have hurt you. And another that said, we're sorry, we were wrong, how can we make it right? How cool is that? Beautiful. The thing is that Christian churches, probably all churches, and I include our church and our denomination in that historically as well, have hurt people, a lot of people, over a long time. I mean, for a long time, churches in this country and even around the world taught that African Americans were not equal to white people. In other words, we don't talk about it this way, but in other words, Christian churches for centuries were teaching something that is evil in the name of God to the children, indoctrinating them in evil in the name of good and God. And unfortunately, this is not an aberration. It didn't just happen once. It's been happening in different ways over time for many centuries. It's symptomatic of a deep flaw in the way that many churches approach truth and Scripture. Some still teach that women are not equal to men. Some still teach that Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and people of other faiths are wrong and are going to hell. And the only ways that any of these ideas have changed over time has been that some members of the church and other church leaders have spoken up and risked being deemed heretics. One of the good things about the United States is that we typically don't kill each other over these things anymore, although that still does happen sometimes too. But let me be clear, I don't want to promote blind support of heresy any more than I want to support blind faith. But I do want to be a church of people who are not afraid to ask questions about the status quo. And who, like Jesus and Buddha and Martin Luther King Jr. and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Bayard Rustin and those who were willing to face adversity and to make sacrifices in order that the earth may be made more just and merciful. Some people want a church that is going to tell them exactly what to do and exactly what to believe. But I want a church of people who think for themselves. I want a church of people who are willing to risk prestige for justice. I want a church of people who are willing to be uncomfortable sometimes in the pursuit of a greater good. I want a church that is filled with people who realize that the future is something that they can have an impact on, and who know that they are the ones that we've been waiting for. People who realize that things do not change until courageous people step forward and do the work. I want a church of people who love boldly and who dare to dream for a better tomorrow and who are humble enough to change their own opinions when they realize that they're wrong, and yet strong enough to advocate for change when they feel they're right. In other words, I am deeply proud and humbled to be the minister of this church. I love you. God bless you. Amen.